Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let me go ahead and get started on my end. And 3 minutes in. All right, here we go. Yo, Short Box Nation. Welcome back to another episode. This is episode 349. And if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. My name is Bart Milligan, and I'll be one of your hosts today. It's been a minute since I had a co-host on an interview episode, but I'm glad to have my right-hand man, Cesar Cordero, joining me for this episode. Wow, that's pretty loud today.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Fresh off of drill.
Fresh
weekend.
off. That boy still smell like a military
F-15.
base. Yeah. Me and Cesar will be bringing you an excellent conversation with Bill Morrison. He's a comic artist, a writer. He was the former editor-in-chief of Mad Magazine, and he was also one of the co-founders of Bongo Comics, the publisher responsible for putting out comics related to TV animated juggernauts, The Simpsons, and Futurama.
Preach.
You definitely heard us sing Bill's praises in abundance 5 episodes ago when we teamed up with Warren Evans, the host of the Simpsons is Greater Than podcast, for our Radioactive Man Spotlight episode. That was episode 344 for anyone keeping count, and one that is absolutely worth checking out if you're new to the show. But aside from Bill's obvious and very popular work with The Simpsons and Futurama, he has illustrated some of your favorite posters for Disney animated classics like Cinderella, The Jungle Book, and more very early on in his career. And most recently, his new book, The Beatles Nerd Search, All You Need Is Love, a Yellow Submarine puzzle book, was published by the company Hero Collector back in November of last year. We'll be spending a lot of time this interview specifically on Bill's contributions to comics and his love of the medium. After all, we're the best comic podcast in the galaxy, so we're going to talk a lot about his love of comic books and what he's done for it. But before we do just that, I want to thank our sponsors, Gotham City Limit and Black Hive Tattoo, for bringing you this episode commercial free. Gotham City Limit is Jacksonville's premier shop for comics, toys, collectibles, and more. And Black Hive is Jacksonville's foremost appointment-only custom tattoo studio. Both of them,
Custom tattoo.
Custom. About one of one, all right? Both of them are the best at what they do. So if you live in the area or find yourself passing through Jacksonville, stop by the shops and tell them the Short Box sent you. Last but not least, we'll be celebrating our 350th episode next week with the full Short Box crew back in attendance for a special Q&A episode. So if you have a burning question about the podcast, our collections, or you want to pick our brains about a particular comic or property, we invite you to write into the show and send us your questions by Saturday, February 12th, all right? We'll answer the best ones on the show, and we'll be giving away and mailing out some exclusive comics to people who send us great questions. Write us at theshortboxjacks@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram or Twitter.
As they say, slide into our DMs.
Yes, slide on in.
Don't know what that means.
Ask us a question. I mean, you know what? Give our old man here, a lesson on current terminology and slang, all right?
It could be derogatory.
Let's give it up one more time for our sponsors and finally bring on our esteemed guest, Shortbox Nation. It's our privilege to welcome a man who has had a hand in illustrating just about every Springfield resident and Futurama character you could think of. Let's welcome Bill Morrison to the show. Hey, Bill.
Hey, guys.
Joining us. They love you, Bill. They love you. You hear that applause?
Bill, he's a madman with that. Please call the police.
Nothing is better than a built-in sound pad and a recorder.
God.
It warms my heart. Hey, Bill,
I need one of those. I need one of those for real life.
It's awesome.
You get it rigged to where anytime you enter a room, there's just an applause.
Yeah.
Yeah, except everybody's got like stone face, serious faces. Like,
for the love of God, please stop the applause.
What is he doing?
Yeah, I need that for when I do Comic Cons, when I do con appearances. Just when anyone comes up to my table, hit the button.
Oh, that's perfect.
Bill, to start off real quick, is it a stretch, or was I accurate in saying that you've probably illustrated every Simpsons character and resident of Springfield?
Pretty much.
Flex.
I mean, I've been involved in not only the comics, which came a couple of years after my involvement started, but advertising, merchandise. So any character that's been on merchandise, all the books, not just the comics, but the Simpsons bookshelf. We used to call them bookshelf books. The ones you'd find at Barnes and Noble in the comic and humor section. I even more recently, I did a poster for a couple of the episodes of the show. So I've drawn some of the newer characters. I mean, there might be some characters in there that have escaped my grasp, let's say, but not too many.
So I got a question, Bill. Were you what was it like? What got you into art and drawing when you were younger? Because I know you came up in Michigan. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
All right. So
South of Detroit.
I almost want to be like, where at?
We're on the hand. Point
Like,
at the hand.
I know the tricks.
Right about here.
There we go. Right there. So
And now I live right around here.
you know what's funny? I had a girlfriend actually who was around there as well. So.
And for our audio listeners, they're pointing at their thumb. All right?
Look, it's a
Around
Michigan
their
thing,
thumb,
dude.
their
Don't
palm.
worry about it. Okay.
Well, you know, Michigan looks like a mitten. So most people from Michigan, if anyone says, where are you from? It's real common to see us hold up our hand. And, you know, if you're in the Upper Peninsula, you have to do this. Yeah. And what I'm doing is I'm holding my other hand up sideways, like the
right
Upper
angle.
Peninsula. Yeah.
So were you instantly smitten with an HB pencil when you were little? Did a 2B magically glide down into your hands and you were like, ah, yes, this is life?
Back then, gee, I don't even know. I'm sure they made HBs and 2Bs, but we had the good old Dixon Ticonderoga.
Here we go, the Ticonderogas. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah,
So
but you know, it was crayons. It was whatever I could get my hands on that made a mark, really.
So were you the quote unquote art guy in class? Like people would, oh yeah, that's Bill. He draws.
Pretty much, yeah. I got into cartoons and comics at a pretty early age, probably cartoons before comics, just because they were on TV. You know, it was accessible. I think the first comics I saw might have belonged to my cousin. So probably when I went over to my cousin's house, I don't remember my brother really. I have an older brother, or had an older brother. He unfortunately just passed a few months ago. Thank you. But he taught me a lot of things and introduced me to a lot of things, but comics was not really one of them because I just don't remember him reading comics, but I remember my cousin having some Batmans, like some late 50s, early 60s Batmans.
Oh yeah.
And it was really Batman, the TV show, that got me into comics in a big way, just in terms of collecting and reading comics, and then eventually deciding that was what I wanted to do for a living.
That's funny because so the 60s Batman TV show was essentially my sort of gateway into comic books as well. And I found out from my mom, as weird as it is, that my name is Caesar, and she named me thusly as a result of her crush on Cesar Romero. And I was like, wait,
that's
what?
Awesome.
I was like, get out of here. Are you kidding me, Mom? She's like, he was a handsome man. Like, what?
His father despises that name.
I know. Like, my dad, like, what am I? Come on.
It pains him to call Caesar by his name.
That's so cool. Yeah. So, okay. So go ahead. No, yeah.
Well, Bill, I was curious, like, what shops, like, did you ever end up collecting comic books from stores or comic shops? Like, what type of shops were you going to?
Well, the way it started out back when I was a kid, there were a few dedicated comic shops, but they were not in my neighborhood. You know, I'd have to get my parents to drive me to the other side of Detroit to get to one of them. But there was this little corner bookstore, just like a mom and pop bookstore, not part of a chain. And they had a couple of spinner racks. And I remember my dad taking me there, and it was kind of shortly after I'd been bitten by the Batmania bug. And I just had to have Batman comics, you know, so he took me to this bookstore, and I remember the first comic that he bought me was a World's Finest. I think it was like number 163. It's the one where Superman and Batman are like kings and they're dividing up the globe. They've got like a big globe.
There's some classic-
they're dividing it with swords.
So all those covers are so iconic
classic and
Now,
goofy.
Yeah, I was going
sometimes.
to say this is like, correct me if I'm wrong, Dick Sprang, Carmine Infantino era.
Yeah, but this Dick Sprang would have retired by then.
Okay.
So it was probably like 1966.
Okay, we got the math here.
And but it would have definitely been Carmine Infantino. He wasn't doing covers for World's Finest back then, but a lot of the early comics I had were Infantino Batmans.
Classic stuff.
I mean, that was definitely that era.
Bill, on the spot, no time to think. Top three favorite Batman artists. Go.
Oh man, you're gonna do them
no
like
particular
that?
order. And here's the thing: I'll cut you some slack. No
Dick
particular
Sprang,
order.
Okay.
Neil Adams,
Classic.
Okay.
Bernie Wrightson.
Oh my god.
Can't be mad at that list.
Oof.
Fantastic, by the way. You were
Bernie-
right. I feel
Also-
like you probably have thought about that list before, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I usually get asked just in general my favorite comic artists, and those three guys are on that list.
Yeah, everyone.
It's a much bigger list, but yeah, as far as Batman goes, Dick Sprang's my number one. I love that era. I got into a not to like drop names or anything, but
Please drop.
We need all the credibility
Yes,
we can get.
please.
All right, share away.
So I was at a convention in Kansas City. I think it was Planet Comic-Con, and I was having dinner with Bill Stout and Mark Schultz,
Oh wow.
and we were talking about Batman and who's your favorite Batman artist and all that. And I said, I love Dick Sprang. I love that like 50s era Batman. I mean, I love kind of all eras of Batman, but I have just I guess a nostalgic fondness for that. And I think being a humor cartoonist primarily, it makes me really love the, can you guys still hear me?
Oh yeah.
No?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I keep getting a ding like whenever I get an email. So
No,
Oh,
okay.
okay. Yeah.
I apologize for, I don't know if you can hear that, but if so, I
It's fake,
apologize.
but it's not a big deal.
It's cool.
Okay, cool. So we're at dinner and we're talking about Batman and who's your favorite Batman artist. And so I say, very unashamedly, I love Dick Sprang and I love that like 50s era
Old
Batman where he fights aliens and giant robots and Bill Stout was like, oh my God, that's terrible. I hate that.
I knew it. I knew it.
He's like, come on, Batman was meant to creep on the rooftops and, he's a Dark Knight detective and all that. And I'm like, hey, don't get me wrong. I love that Batman. And then Mark Schultz jumped to my defense and he's like, I love that Batman too. It's like, I love the dark one, but I also love the goofy one that fought all the crazy villains and robots and all that. So it made me realize sort of that Batman is sort of a totem that you can imprint a lot of different things on. He works in a number of different ways. So all the different eras of Batman, when I see people get into arguments and conversations about the movies and, this, I'm not going to, name certain actors or directors, but, this Batman was horrible. And
Sure.
my favorite is Michael Keaton or this other one. I'm like, they're not all my favorite, but they're all Batman and they all capture some essence of Batman. So, they're all great. Ben Affleck is great as Batman.
I think so.
George Clooney was a great Batman, even though the script was not good.
I have said the exact same thing and everyone laughs at me.
If they had cast George Clooney in one of the more recent modern iterations of Batman, I think he'd be amazing. And I think George would agree that the script was not good and he could do a damn good, serious, kick-ass Batman.
So
I mean, all you gotta do is look at all his other movies to know he's got that range.
So I heard a rumor, and I don't know how much truth there is to it, that Neil Adams sort of based Batman's physique kind of on Ted Danson, which is an interesting sort of reference point for his Batman, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
a classic Sam from Cheers, you know, like sort of like this hairy, muscular kind of guy,
Yeah. Kind of
you
a
know,
swimmer's
athletic.
body.
Right, you're right. Very like,
Yeah.
which makes sense if he's supposed to be a ninja, but it's kind of funny because, like, yeah, you could totally sort see George Clooney, you know, taking up the role of the Bat in that regard, you know.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Bill, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the extremely hype, what's your level of excitement or hype for the upcoming Batman movie? You know, it's coming out next month, and then actually less than a month.
I'm very excited. I don't know if I've seen all the trailers and previews, but I've seen a couple, and it looks like there's a lot to be excited about. So I think it's going to be great. I don't know if it's going to be incredible or my favorite movie version of Batman. Actually, my favorite movie version of Batman, because it did screen in theaters for a week or two, is Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh, it's
man, come on.
hands down my favorite. Yeah. And until they can do a Batman movie where his cape drapes elegantly along the backside of his calf the way Bernie Wrightson draws it, we're gonna be we're gonna be waiting a while.
I've shared this story a few times on the show already, but when that movie premiered, I think on TV for the first time, they were running a contest on the radio where all you had to do was answer, you know, who was under the mask itself, who was the Phantasm. And I remember my dad calling us from work. He was in the Navy, so he called us on his lunch break, his 10-minute lunch break. Like, for the love of God, please tell me you guys watched the show, and called the radio. They're giving away like $1,000. This was like, you know, the 90s, so that was like equivalent to $2.2 million now. And you're like, no, Dad, but we love you.
You're like 6 years old. Daddy, come home. I miss you.
No, press record on the VHS player. Record Batman Mask of Phantasm.
For God's sakes, boy, don't let me down.
Now, before we go any further, I do want to say, Bill, you've run on 2 episodes of Simpsons is Greater Than, hosted by a good friend of the show, Warren Evans. I recommend anyone tuning in today to check out episodes 14 and 32 of that podcast for a great deep dive into Bill's career, ranging from his early work on Disney posters and, of course, his work on The Simpsons. But today, me and C want to focus, Bill, on your contributions to comic books as well as your love of the medium this episode. So I want to go ahead and kick it off with talking about Bongo Comics. You know, you were a co-founder alongside Matt Groening and Steve and Cindy Vance. You also served as creative director for a long stretch. You know, the company was around, or the publishing company was around from 1993 to about 2018. I think you had left around 2012, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I was still at Bongo in 2012, but I stepped away from my position as creative director, and I started working on, we did a couple of comic reader apps.
Oh,
yeah.
That were
And I want to
similar
get to
to
that.
Comixology.
Yeah, and I want to get to that because I found that out for the first time today, and I took a look at both of those. Really impressed. So I'll definitely come back to that. But it must have been like living a childhood dream, you know, to be at the head of a comic book publishing company. Am I far out in saying that?
Oh, not at all. It was kind of amazing, you know, because we started doing Simpsons comics in a magazine called Simpsons Illustrated. And I drew the first one in issue 1, and it was just a short Krusty the Clown comic strip, you know, kind of looked like a Sunday comic strip that you'd see in a newspaper. So it was like, I don't know, 6 or 8 panels. And that was the first time I had the opportunity to draw a comic. And I had, you know, like I said earlier, I'd grown up, after I started reading comics, I decided I wanted to be a comic artist, but it kind of just wasn't in the cards, at least not for a while, because I had this sort of, I now look at it as an irrational fear of New York City. Because I grew up watching 70s cop shows that were set in New York, and Martin Scorsese movies.
I was about to say, just watch Mean Streets and that'll be enough.
Yeah, all you ever heard was, you know, back then, the early 70s was, oh, New York is crime ridden, and, you know, you get mugged every other day, and And I just thought, I don't know if I could handle New York. So I decided to, when I was about halfway through art school, um, like I had been sort of focusing my portfolio on comic art. Every time I would get an assignment in illustration, I would try to push it in the direction of comic art. And then I discovered airbrush and this love of doing these kind of California style airbrush paintings with palm trees and water droplets dripping down bottles of beer and girls on roller skates and all that kind of stuff. So
Cool.
I started doing these illustrations and they didn't look half bad. So I sort of shifted my portfolio in that direction and then ended up going out to California to become an illustrator. That was how I got into doing movie poster art and et cetera. So it wasn't until meeting Matt Groening and starting to work on some of the Simpsons projects, but then the magazine, that I got to realize that childhood dream of being a comic artist. And I loved it so much, just doing that one little crusty strip, that I called Steve Vance, who was the editor. And I said, Steve, I really had a blast doing that strip. So I know we're working on the second issue. If there's going to be more comics, I'd love to be considered for that. And Steve said, well, Matt wants to have comics in every issue and he really wants to have more than one page. He wants to expand and, maybe have 10 pages of comics, like make it a real important part of the magazine. But, honestly, we're scrambling to get the second issue done. And so here's the deal. If you can write something, then you can also draw it. So, come up with a story, write it, and then, because we don't have anybody to write a script right now. There's nothing done, and we don't have anyone who's got the time for it. And I just sort of calmly, very coolly, as if it was no big deal, I said, "Oh, okay, great. I'll get you something the next couple of days." Cool. Hung up the phone. Oh my God, what did I just
how scared were you?
I was terrified, and I just thought I've never written anything other than school papers. I didn't even know how to type, so I thought, how am I going to do this? So I started thinking, well, like, how do I come up with an idea? What are like some funny things that happened to me when I was a kid? And maybe I can just take those and turn me into Bart, and then turn whatever adults were involved into Homer or, whoever. And that's what I did. I came up with a story based on something, from childhood. And I wrote it all out longhand, and thank God my wife knew how to type. So she typed it up for me. So I didn't look like an idiot.
That's awesome.
I turned it in and they loved it. And I think Matt rewrote the punchline and just made the end slightly funnier, or probably a lot funnier. But then from that point on, it was like, okay, you're a writer now. Wow. And so every issue we started, because it was now Steve writing, me writing, both of us doing art, we started expanding the comic section until we got to the point where we had done one annual, which was a 3D issue. And then it was coming up on the next, we had to start thinking about the next annual in the second year. And I don't know if it was Steve or Matt, but one of them decided, we're having so much fun doing comics. Why don't we just make it a comic book? And we'll just do all comics, and we'll do it comic book size. And they even changed the name. So instead of Simpsons Illustrated Annual, it was Simpsons Comics and Stories, as sort of a tribute to Walt Disney Comics and Stories.
Which just celebrated it's almost 29-year anniversary back in January.
Yeah, we did that in I think the first one came out in February of '93. So yeah, 29 years. Wow, that's a long time.
So I mean, how long? Because it sounds like for the most part, those beginning years was a lot of trial by fire, right? Like playing the role of writer, artist and probably every other, role you could think of in the comic book world. But how soon before you really started to feel comfortable in your own shoes? Like, were you always having to just kind of look internally for those story ideas, or did you eventually kind of just like, I kind of get the hang of this?
It took a couple of years, and I actually didn't refer to myself as an art or as a writer for at least a couple of years, because I just thought, well, I'm writing. After we started Bongo on the success of Simpson's Comics and Stories, we did the first year, and then Steve and Cindy left, and so they threw me into the deep end as editor.
And you're probably just like, damn it, I thought this was the deep end.
Yeah. So I think maybe once I became editor, I figured I had to own up to being a writer, maybe. But I just remember it taking a while. Like, people would say, "So are you a writer?" And I'd say, "Well, I write, but I'm not really a writer." And then, after doing it enough, and not only coming up with stories based on my childhood, but based on popular culture or what's happening in the news, you know, uh, eventually it started getting easier.
So let's take a look into some of your processes, because you're in that position. You're fresh faced, you're eager, you want to do a good sort of create a good product. Did all of the anecdotes of the Marvel method and all that stuff immediately come to your head, and you're thinking, okay, how did the people before me do this sort of thing? What do I do?
Well, I learned from Steve, basically the nuts and bolts of doing a Simpson story, and kind of what worked for Bongo.
Okay.
So although I knew about the Marvel method, I knew that wouldn't work for us, because I didn't feel like we had a Jack Kirby or a Steve Ditko,
Right,
who could, who was not only an artist, but a writer, who could come up with stories and do basically draw the story based on an outline, and then have somebody else fill it in. Um, when I did start doing that was with my own comic Roswell. And I discovered that because I was at that point a writer and an artist, I didn't have to write a full script. I also didn't really have an editor, so I didn't have anybody that I had to turn a script into, for them to give me notes and feedback, which might have been a better thing. I might have, turned out
you
better
wild
stories.
man. You're a wild man.
But that's a high wire act that not a lot of people can pull off.
Sure.
It really takes the perfect combination of writer and artist, and like I said, an artist who's also a writer, to really do that. So, I have worked that way, but it's, it wasn't the Bongo way,
Sure. No, I was just more or less curious, like what does the Bongo way sort of look like, where you're kind of forming it, right?
Well, yeah, I think as our mandate in the early days, especially, was to make the comics sort of a seamless extension of the TV show.
Okay.
So we kept all the continuity of the show. Anytime, like when Maud Flanders died, I think we had maybe a few scripts already in production where she was alive. So we kept those, but then once those were published, we killed her off, or
Right.
we always followed whatever they did on the show.
Sure.
And
And
as
was that
editor,
I'm sorry, was that per mandate from Matt, or was it just like your idea to, hey, let's just follow along with the continuity for the show?
I don't remember Matt ever telling us to do that. I remember that just being kind of the way I felt they should be done, and everybody at Bongo agreed. I never got pushback from anyone, including Matt. Matt would sometimes come down to my office, but it was really rare. Usually he'd say, "Hey, I got the latest issue. It's really great."
Oh, good stuff.
Well, that's good.
And there were like maybe 2 or 3 times when he came down and said, "Hey, I got the latest issue. don't ever do this again.
wait, is there a particular issue or I guess story that you remember that he was like,
It was mainly covers. Like
Hmm.
I remember doing a cover for Bart Simpson where it was a parody of a James Bond movie poster.
Okay.
The one where you've got the female legs and then James Bond in the distance with the gun. I forget what movie that was for, but so I did that I had Lisa. It was like a kind of a Lisa centric story. And so I've got Lisa's legs in the foreground and you see the bottom of her skirt, and then Bart way in the distance and he's got a slingshot. And Matt comes down and he goes, "Don't do that." And I'm like, "What?" And he
That sounds
goes,
rad though.
"Well, it's like, you got Lisa's legs apart and it's like he's firing at her crotch." I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
Too far from that training.
Sorry
Too
about
far.
that."
So
He also didn't like he didn't like any drinking on the cover.
Huh.
Matt was really, and still is. I'm talking about him like he's dead. He's very savvy, and he always knew what worked on the show. But for the comics, even though we tried to have make the comics as much like the show as possible, he also knew the audience, and he knew that we had more kids reading the comics, whereas the show was, a wider age range.
Right.
So he'd say, "Yeah, don't, you can have stories that take place at Moe's Bar and, have the characters drinking, but on the cover, don't have Homer chugging a beer,
Sure.
Right.
So, just stuff like that."
Well, even I guess that being said, I guess there must have been a tremendous sort of sense of freedom and excitement working on characters that didn't exist on the show, right? Did it ever feel stressful working on Simpsons comics, knowing that the show had garnered such a loyal fan base?
Well, part of making the comics as much like the show as possible is that we tried not to introduce new characters if a perfectly acceptable character existed on the show that we could use for, like if there was a salesman, traveling salesman, let's say,
Sure.
and a writer wrote this, new character, as the editor, I would say, well, let's just use Lau Langley as the salesman, the monorail salesman guy.
Right.
That's just an example out of my head. We never did that, but that would be the kind of thing I would say. I'd say, well, we could use this other character who's, kind of like a tertiary character that you don't see that much, but that character fits perfectly into this role. So let's use him or her.
Perfect.
I got a question about some of the spin-off comic books, specifically Radioactive Man, because we spent a whole episode like just absolutely fanboying over that.
Oh yeah.
But before I ask that, I am curious. Bill, you're one of the very few guests I think we've had on the show that has worn pretty much all of the hats when it comes to, or played a part in the role of every or had a hand in every part of the comic making process. We've had artists who also wrote their own book, but I don't think we've ever had like the trifecta: writer, artist, and editor. And I know that you've also, inked and also colored a lot of the Simpsons comics and whatnot. But what is your favorite role? What was your favorite role, and what do you think is the most challenging role to play when it comes to making comic books?
Wow, that's a good question. I did enjoy being editor. However, at some point there, and the reason I stepped down in 2012 was mainly because I got to the point where I felt like I was sort of grading test papers when I would get a script.
Wow.
Like a writer would turn in a script, I would go through it and I would just say, this, dialogue is too long. It's going to be a huge balloon, trim this down. Homer would never say this. He'd say it like this. And I kept making those notes over and over so many times, not with every writer. I mean, some writers like Ian Boothby, he would turn in a script and it was just kind of like, playtime, just reading the script, be entertained, make one or two notes, and that was it. But you know, for some writers, it was, you know, especially newer ones, it was more difficult, and it just kind of felt like I really want to be more part of the creative process, and I don't want to just feel like the buzzkill who's making these talented writers change everything. So editing was fun. I guess I would have to say I'm an artist at heart. So of, you know, of all the different hats, I think wearing the hat of the artist is my favorite. And maybe most favorite is cover artist within that subset, because
Yeah.
I love drawing comics, but it's hard. It's hard work. It takes a long time. It involves more than just drawing, because I always compare it, and you know, a lot of artists compare it to movie production.
Yep.
Because as the artist of a comic book telling the story, you're the director, you're the actor, you're the set designer, you're the costume designer, you're the location scout. You know, there's a lot of things that come into play. So as much as I love that, it is hard work. Whereas being a cover artist, the only thing you're really thinking about is, okay, I got this story and I want to do a cover that sells that story, that kind of intrigues the customer a little bit about what they're about to read if they plunk their money down.
Sure.
And it's more fun because you're coming up with a kind of a poster image. It's like you're creating the movie poster for the little mini movie.
So you've mentioned a lot about, you talk a lot about the cinematic process and comparing it to comic books. And I totally understand. Like, you're sitting here looking at a panel to panel. You're like, okay, rule of thirds. How do I get this set up the right way? And but you also mentioned, like, oh, Homer, without even like batting an eye, Homer wouldn't say that. How easy was it to get to the point where you could speak as a writer with the characters' voices like that, with just such a command of, oh no, I know Homer wouldn't say that, like, out jump, you know?
Part of that, I think I developed even before we started doing the comics.
Right.
Because I was drawing The Simpsons for merchandise and advertising and all that other stuff. Starting in 1990, when I think the show was about a month old, and I was recruited to start drawing the characters. So I took it upon myself to record every episode so that I could, you know, just, if I always had whatever reference I needed for whatever I had to do. And I remember that I was working at Fox in the licensing and merchandising department. And some of these executives would actually come to me because I was like the know-it-all on The Simpsons, because I'd studied these episodes and I watched them over and over again. And it was really weird to have these executives come in and say, Bill, do you remember what episode it was where Homer becomes a safety inspector? And I'm like, yes, that was 2F56.
Bill's doing sit-ups like Travis Bickle while he's answering the question.
So I think a lot of that got ingrained very early. So by the time we were doing the comics, if a writer turned in a script, I could hear the voice in my head, and you know, it was very natural to say something like, you know, that sounds too smart for Bart. You know, he's smart, but you know, he wouldn't say it that way unless it's a bit where one of the things, like, Homer was sometimes smart if he would put on the reading glasses, you know, and then you might hear him say something out of character, you know, like, you know, that made him sound super smart. But it had to be for a bit. It was like Roger Rabbit, you know, he could only do certain things if it was funny.
Only if it's funny, right? The context definitely mattered.
On the top.
So it was, you know, I think it happened fairly naturally and early on.
That's cool.
On the topic of, just staying on the topic of your work on the merchandising really quick, what piece of merch comes to mind that you would say like you're most proud of? Like, is there one or two that immediately come to mind that you're still like, yeah, that was prime Bill?
Mm, I know some of the video game boxes, like Krusty's Super Fun House.
Mm.
I did almost all the early video game box art, so a lot of those were really fun. God, there's so much. Simpsons Pinball Party, the like the back glass for that pinball game.
Sure.
That's one I remember. I don't know. There's a lot of them that kind of jump out.
Oh, I'm looking at that Simpsons Pinball Party one. Yeah, that looks pretty good. That's really not just pretty good. That is pretty cool. Yeah, awesome.
That was fun. Bart's House of Weirdness was an really fun one. I think Bart versus the World was another one that was fun.
So essentially, what you're saying is that you're the Drew Struzan of The Simpsons. Got it. Thank you, Bill. I think we're good, guys. We're good.
Bill, so finally getting to something that I've been, one of my burning questions. Back in December, we had, Warren on the podcast.
Yep.
And dedicated an entire episode talking about one of my favorite creations of yours while you were at Bongo Comics, and that's Radioactive Man. Of course, it's obvious because of the superhero. He's the superhero in the Simpsons lore. So, of course, he spoke to me. And I love that episode where they introduced Radioactive Man. Like that, 3 men in a comic book is, my life with Cesar and our friend Andrew. Like, it is
story.
Exactly, our friendship, the origin of our friendship. But I love how the character of Radioactive Man is both an homage and a parody of like Golden Age and Atomic Age superheroes like the Hulk and Spider-Man. I was curious, like, what do you remember about working on that comic with Steve and Cindy, and what were some of the influences that you were probably referencing when creating his series?
Well, getting back to your earlier question about creating characters that didn't exist on the show, that was really just a lot of fun and kind of pure joy working on Radioactive Man. And Steve is really responsible for setting up that in that first 6-issue miniseries that we did. He set up the idea that we'll start Radioactive Man with his first issue in 1952, kind of, when there's a lot of bomb testing going on in the desert in the US. And so not starting him really in the Golden Age, although we did do an issue that showed sort of his Golden Age predecessor, Radio Man. But, and then, starting him in 1952 and then kind of checking in on him every 10 years or so until we got to the present day.
That's great.
And
I had said in that episode that I love the concept of you guys kind of jumping around and playing around with the issue numbering and the timeline, but it's also a comic collector's worst nightmare trying to figure out like how to go about collecting those issues.
Comic retailers hated that. It really, really messed with their heads and made their jobs harder. And I remember having to like explain to a lot of people, and some were some of those retailers that, well, if you look in the indicia, open the first page, look at the bottom, and it'll actually say what number issue it is. It'll say number 216 is issue 3 of Radioactive Man. So, if you really needed to know exactly what the real numbering was, that you could find it there.
Yeah, you were like, chill out, nerds.
Yeah,
we got to figure it out.
Get on board with this. This is trickster god stuff.
But it was so Steve got so into it that he actually came up with a publishing timeline that was just internal, just kind of for us, that explained how we got to 1,000 issues, because number 6 was issue 1,000. How we got to 1,000 issues, having started in 1952 and not like 1938. I mean, you look at the Superman and Detective Comics that have reached 1,000. Look how long that took.
Right.
Those started in the late 30s, and they're just now getting to issue 1000.
Right.
We started in 1952 and somehow got to 1000 in 1994.
That's great.
And the way Steve did it was he actually had written down, like in 1972, it went from 12 times a year to 16 times a year or whatever. But then when you remember when DC did Action Comics Weekly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he hit on that and he said, so in 1980, whatever, Radioactive Man went from being like however many times it was a year to, instead of weekly, Steve one up that and he said, so it went to twice every week. So it's sometime in the 80s, apparently we were putting out Radioactive Man twice a week. And that allowed us to get to 1,000 issues by 1994.
So
Your
it's
poor staff.
So it's mathematically sound in a very weird alternative reality.
But then when later on, when we resurrected the title, it made it very easy for us to keep with that numbering system, because we could go back to the chart that Steve made and say, okay, we want to do an issue of Radioactive Man that parodies, like Spider-Man having issues with campus protesters. And so we could go to that and say, okay, we want this to be in 1969 or 1971 or whatever. And we could say, okay, if our issue is coming out in November, what issue would it have to be? What number would it have to be in order to be, the November issue of 1972? And we could look at that chart and go, oh, okay, it's number 2, whatever.
That's so awesome. And also so OCD.
It's very OCD. But we know that our fans are very OCD. So
big time.
Yeah.
Look, 1,000 issues, 1,000 body bags of artists and writers who tried to do it. Keep up.
Bill, I know you've mentioned in previous interviews that there was talks of doing a Radioactive Man cartoon show, which I would love to see. Anytime that I talk to Warren about like Simpsons movie ideas, I always go to Radioactive Man. But I know the original idea was shelved, when Futurama came out. But I was curious if that idea for a Radioactive Man cartoon show is ever to be revived in the near future. Would you want to be personally involved in it, or would you like to see like a different studio attempt it?
No, I would love to be involved in something like that. Yeah, it was a real disappointment that it didn't happen, especially because we had created so many of the characters. And so the idea that, the stuff that was created at Bongo was actually going to be part of the Simpsons TV universe was super exciting. I mean, I remember getting excited. If you recall, like the early versions of Radioactive Man on the show, he didn't have those little oval side cup earpieces. But eventually they started adding those. So I came up with those, and because I always looked at his head in the show, and I was like, well, where, if that hood is fitting that tight, you ought to be able to see his ears. It's kind of like what Jim Lee did with Batman.
Right, you could see
more recently he started showing sort of the ear outline in his cowl, and I always thought, and I'm sure I was riffing on some Wally Wood design or some 60s superhero character that had those, but I thought, I'll try adding those, and I did, and Steve thought it looked good. So when they actually started incorporating that on the show, that was a thrill for me, because it's like, something I did, they accepted it, and they started using the Radioactive Man logo whenever they would do a fake Radioactive Man cover. So even that was cool. So the idea of like a half-hour animated Radioactive Man show that would have Gloria Grand and Rod Rutledge as Fallout Boy and Claude Kane as Radioactive Man, because those were all the the secret identities that we created in the comic book.
I love that you
and
guys
all the villains.
I love that you guys stuck with the classic comic book
Oh,
alliteration
the alliteration.
for
you gotta,
everyone's,
yeah.
civilian names.
Yeah, again, that was Steve. He wrote there was one issue in the original 6 that I co-wrote with Steve, which was number 3, the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil
Oh yeah,
homage.
yeah, with the cover homage where it's Radioactive Man walking in on Fallout Boy, the equivalent of the Green Arrow, Green Lantern.
My ward is a junkie.
My ward is a
Right.
junkie cover. Love it.
But it was my sidekick is a dirty hippie.
Yeah, there we go. There we
And
go.
Steve wanted to do that because he thought, that's an important, he was kind of looking at milestones throughout the history of comics from 52 up to the present day. What should we hit on? And he recognized that Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil period as a real milestone.
Oh yeah, that's a classic run.
But
I mean, they were touching on like big socio-economic and political issues in the comic book.
right.
Not just Green Arrow, but also in Batman too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those and although those were big moments in comic history, those early 70s books, Steve was actually a Marvel guy. He grew up reading Marvel comics and didn't read DC's back then.
Man, that's a man I could admire.
Let's calm down, B. Let's calm down.
Now, I, on the other hand, discovered Marvel comics more in my teens, like when I was about 13, 14. But that mom and pop bookstore that I mentioned earlier did not carry Marvel comics. So I actually grew up, the only Marvel comic I ever saw growing up was my best friend had a copy of Fantastic Four number 42. And he didn't really collect comics. So it was a comic he picked up somewhere. And it was always just kind of sitting on a table in his basement. It was just always laying there. So whenever we would, just be horsing around in his basement, if there was kind of like a lull in the activity, I would pick up that comic book and I would flip through it. I just remember as a kid, because I was such a DC kid, I was like, God, these characters, they don't even have masks. They don't have capes.
They're dirty hippies.
This guy's just a big pile of rocks. This other guy is just kind of a rip off of Plastic Man.
I like that the characters weren't garish enough for you. That's
they all had the same uniform. They're all in these blue.
That's the best part of this story. We need to turn these guys up a little more.
Yeah. So I just remember at that age, I was like, Marvel. I remember seeing them on TV, the Spider-Man, Ralph Bakshi Spider-Man cartoon.
Oh, sure.
And I remember the Marvel superheroes that were on weekday afternoons. So I knew Thor and Iron Man and Submariner. But again, Submariner, no mask.
Just a Speedo.
Only had a cape if he was sitting on his throne. Yeah, just a Speedo. I didn't get the wings on his ankles. It's like, what do those do?
Yeah.
Thor, Thor had a cape.
Yeah.
So I give him that. But again, no mask. The Hulk, again, just kind of a monster. I prefer Frankenstein. So I had all these reasons to just be like, Marvel. And then it wasn't until like I said, I was 13 or 14 and I was like, oh, these are good.
Look at you. You're like, what Marvel? I'll stick to my House of Secrets.
So what was it that finally made you a fan? Was it a particular title, character, or maybe a creative team?
No, it was really just my sister had a friend who came over to play one day and she brought this small stack of comic books. And she said, my brother was getting rid of these and I know you like comics. So I thought you might like them. And I was like, oh, comics, new comics, great. And I took them and I started looking through them and I was like, oh, these are Marvels. Shoot.
This is breaking my heart.
Nobody's I've never heard anybody say what you're saying and it's making me laugh. It's awesome.
Yes, I guess I'm confident enough to admit it.
No, I mean,
but one day it was like I had them sitting in my bedroom and one day it was raining I remember clearly, and I didn't have anything to do. I didn't have any new comics to read except these Marvels that were sitting there. And so I'm like, oh, okay,
I
you
guess.
know, I guess, I've got nothing else to read. I guess this will do. So I picked up, one of them was an Iron Man.
Okay.
And this is like 1972, so this is, this was like prime era Marvel Comics. And I just remember at that age reading it and just going, wow, this is different. This is good. The art turned me on. Um, and I started going through them and I read every one. And I was like, all right, I got to get more of these. These are great. So I think it was just a combination of the right age, and having nothing else to read.
All right, I wanted to see what were some of these issues that were out around 72, and I see a lot of them written by Roy the Boy Thomas, with art by Barry Smith and Jim Mooney.
You don't have to call him the boy. You're not Stan Lee.
So is it safe to say, does Iron Man hold a special place in your heart? Is he like one of your favorite Marvel characters?
I always like to draw him.
Because I hated drawing him. That dude was so hard to draw. It's like, how do you draw metal and get that perfect, reflection off?
I don't know. I like drawing the repulsor rays and the jets coming out of his feet.
Hell yeah.
But once I got some Spider-Man comics, that was it for me. So it was Spidey and Cap were my favorites, still are. And I couldn't get enough of Spider-Man, and so I started, I started going around on my bike and finding stores that had Marvel comics, and then I would hear about, hey, there's this kid that lives over on Hunter Street, and he's got a bunch of comics. Maybe we could go over there. Like, I was talking to other friends of mine who were getting into comics, and they'd say, why don't we go over there with some of our doubles or some of the stuff we don't want and see if he wants to trade. And so we would just boldly like ride up on this guy's house and knock on the door and be like, hey, we heard you got comics and we got these that we want to trade. You got anything? And then we would just sit there and start laying out comics. And, sometimes these guys would have stuff from, like early to mid 60s, stuff we'd never even seen. The best though, I mean, the way that I built most of my Marvel collection was, I had a friend whose dad used to buy comics for him, and he was primarily Marvel comics. And so I go to his house, and down in his basement he had these shelves, and he had like stacks of comics. He'd have like a big stack of Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and Daredevil and X-Men. And he wasn't into them. He was into blacklight posters and Looney Tunes. He loved Looney Tunes.
Huh.
And so, because I was a cartoonist at that point, I was, starting to draw, people in school were knowing that I could, whip out a good Flintstone in a moment's notice. That sounded dirty.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to whip out your Leon Schlesinger.
Well, Bill,
give me your best Chuck Jones.
I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, but our listeners have heard much dirtier.
It's true.
Okay, good to know. Anyway, he would say, what do you need to do a blacklight poster of the Roadrunner? And I'd be like, well, I don't know. And he'd be like, well, how about if I gave you some comic books? Because he knew what I was into. And I'd say, okay, great. So I would do a Roadrunner and I'd take it over to his house. We put it under the black light. Oh, that looks awesome. Here. And he would hand me a stack of comic books.
Oh, he's
and so I'm like, what else do you want? So I just started doing posters for him. And every time I would go to his house, I would come back with this stack of comic books. And the only thing he wouldn't let go of were his Fantastic Fours and his Sergeant Furies, because he said his dad loved those. And if he ever traded those away, his dad would get upset. So, but I came away with, I didn't have Spider-Man #1 or Amazing Fantasy 15 or anything like that. But I came away with like some early stuff. And I think I had Daredevil like 1 through 100.
Dang, wow.
At one point. Yeah.
you have lived and breathed being an artist since I guess since the moment you were able to pick up a pencil. This is really impressive that you have literally used your hands and a pencil to accomplish so much, including getting a bunch of Marvel comic books.
Enable a drug habit fueled by comics.
That's awesome.
Yo, man, I'll draw you a Roadrunner for freaking
15 cents.
Bill Everett, Stan Lee, Daredevil, dude.
That was probably when I realized the real value of what I could do with a pencil, because I mean, in a way it's almost like printing money.
Right.
And now what I really love to do is I love whenever I get asked to do like a charity fundraiser, either to just participate or to organize one, I do that pretty regularly. There's nothing like the thrill of doing a drawing and then auctioning it off and having somebody pay, $700 or $1,000 or $1,200, something that didn't exist 2 hours ago, and now here it is, and it's, making money for a good cause.
What an abstract sort of cool way to see how your world is, right? Like, you have a pencil, and with it, you can transmute something that like you said, didn't exist, and now it's going towards like humanity's greater good. Like, not even like in a weird, lofty sort of platitude kind of way. It's like, no, I realized from an early age I could take a pencil and turn it into goodwill. Like, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really a good feeling. And I mean, you ask any artist who's ever donated art to the Hero Initiative or the Milk Roast Fund of the NCS, and they'll tell you the same thing. I mean, it's a little disappointing sometimes when you spend a lot of time on something and it goes for $40, but that's more rare. More often than not, it's something that you might have valued at a few $100s, and it brings in $1,000, and it goes to help somebody out. It's it's a great feeling.
Well, speaking of pencils, let me ask you a question. Since you are, all due respect, a little old school when it comes to drawing, you've got your pencils, maybe you've got a quill, maybe you got a nib, maybe, a little bit.
Got a few of those.
How did you, if you have transitioned or dabbled into the digital stuff? Is it something that's an uphill battle? Is it something that you kind of took to like a duck to water? Or is it something you're just like, you know what? I like my medium. I'm good with this. This is what you get.
I kind of view it as a tool, like any other tool. I love original art. I collect original art. So it's hard for me. Like, I first started using computers just for coloring.
Sure.
Now if I'm doing a job, especially if I think it's a job that, well, some jobs pay pretty well and some don't. So sometimes if you get a job that pays well, but the art isn't really valuable on the secondary market, it's like it's not collectible, then it's very easy to go, well, I'll do this job on my Cintiq. It'll only exist digitally, but that's fine because it's just an advertising job that, nobody's ever going to really be interested in buying the original art. Other times, especially in comics, because comics don't really generally pay all that well, I'll get a job that doesn't pay well, and I accept it because I know if I do a physical piece of art, I can probably sell that to a collector, and then that, kind of makes up the difference. So it all depends. I kind of weigh every situation differently. I'm at the point now where I can draw and I can ink and color on the Cintiq if I need to. But generally I still, I just love the physical process. So when I can, and it economically makes sense, I always do things the old school way.
Nice.
Bill, I'm gonna try something new here with you, if you don't mind, right?
Sure.
We do a regular series of episodes dedicated to highlighting the careers and contributions of some of the best comic artists to ever pick up a pencil. And I think you'd be, right up there in this giant pantheon of great comic book artists. So I want to name off a few of the artists we've covered in this series. It's called our Artist Spotlight series, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind, whether that be a standout project by them, if you have a favorite project.
How very humble of you to plug our show on the show.
I learned from the best. Or you could just tell me some words or thoughts you have related to their contributions. I'm going to start off with our most recent Artist Spotlight individual that we did, and that is Jim Lee. What comes to mind when you think Jim Lee?
I think boss, because he was my boss at Mad Magazine.
That's right.
I'm in awe of his talent, and also his business savvy. He's one of the rare artists that sort of has that rare perfect combination of being very talented and always being in demand and being able to do a lot of work. Kind of can pick and choose his projects. But a lot of artists that are like that don't have the business acumen and get taken advantage of. And Jim has managed to, he's got talent on both sides of that, the business and the art, and he's able to put them together and make them work. I've been to his house, and it's, I can tell you, it's
stolen. You can tell us what you've taken from there, Bill. It's a safe space, right? What have you taken?
I took a napkin.
Did Jim sketch on said napkin?
That's funny.
No, I was hoping to get him to sketch before I left, but it didn't happen.
How awesome was the house? I imagine
it's an awesome house. It obviously costs a lot of money, and he deserves everything he's got.
Well said.
Very happy for him. It was great having, I've known Jim for years, but just in a kind of casual way.
Sure.
And it was great. Especially this was, just a couple of years ago. So at this point in his career, he's climbed to the toppermost of the poppermost, as the Beatles would say. And, so also being a fan myself, I know how revered he is and how difficult it is to, even get an audience with him, or, get him on the phone or to answer an email, because he's just so freaking busy.
Right.
So it was just really cool to be able to walk down the hall and see him in there, working at his desk or at his drawing board, and be able to just pop in and say hi and ask a question and just, shoot the breeze a little bit.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. It kind of reconfirms some things that we were talking about on that episode. I
like how you were like, what did you take from his house? And I halfway expect you to be like, any action figures?
Yo, I was hoping for something. But a napkin works. All right, I'm gonna name the next artist here, okay? And he was actually our first artist that we did our whole Spotlight series on. And you may recognize this name, but Jack the King Kirby.
The King.
Jack Kirby is, I think, what first got me very excited about Marvel when I did finally come around. And I remember in my early days being exposed to his art, I had friends who were anti-Ditko.
Wow.
And they would talk about
them. Hopefully you're not friends with them anymore.
Whatever.
Oh, they're long dead. And I had friends who were anti-Kirby, because everybody at that time, early 70s, people don't realize this now, but even though those two guys I just mentioned did some of their best work during that period, they weren't as highly revered as Neil Adams and Jim Steranko and Bernie Wrightson. And then as we got into the later 70s, Kirby became even less popular in favor of people like John Byrne and et cetera, George Perez. So I remember loving Kirby, emulating him a little bit, but mostly just learning a lot from his storytelling.
Sure.
So I didn't end up becoming a Kirby clone where I was drawing like him, but I learned a lot about just pacing and the dynamic effect that you can have. I had that book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way,
Yeah.
which was, John Buscema and
Mhm.
Stan Lee, but a lot of the examples in there were Kirby
Right.
and Romita. And so just learned a lot about dynamic storytelling from him.
Well said. All right. Next artist, I got two more for you. All right. The next one is Bernie Wrightson.
Bernie Wrightson. Oh, he blew my mind. Um, when I discovered Bernie Wrightson, it was in the pages of Creepy and Eerie.
Oh, yes.
And occasionally he would do a story, but then, he always, for a period, he was doing those like inside front cover introductory pieces with Uncle Creepy and Cousin Eerie.
Oh, yeah.
And the story Jennifer.
Oh, Jennifer, come on, Bill, talk dirty.
Oh my God.
So
Actually,
good.
I just did a tribute piece for a book that's going to be coming out, tribute, Bernie Wrightson tribute book.
Wow.
And I chose to do, I actually did two pieces. I did one that was Captain Stern.
Oh, yes.
And then the other was a Jennifer tribute.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I was at the time, like there were these posters that were coming out. There was like a whole series of Bernie Wrightson posters that a lot of comic shops carried. I had this one on my wall that was it was called Mementos, and it was this axe murderer kind of hanging over a fence with his axe, and he had all these heads lined up.
I know exactly which
like
one
all
you're
of his
talking
trophies.
about. Yep, it's like that's like a really shoddy wooden fence. He's just kind of dangling his arm. Oh yeah,
and
Bernie's
he's
my
giving
favorite.
this like real creepy look from under his eyebrows.
Oh yeah.
And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, would come over to I was still living with my parents, so she would come over, kind of hang out in my bedroom while I was doing art assignments at my drawing board. And she's like, why do you have that poster? That's the creepiest. Oh my God. And to this day, like I'll do that look. I'll imitate the look of the axe wielding psychopath.
And that's love, ladies and gentlemen.
It gives her chills. Like she goes running out of the room if I do that.
That's adorable.
But as much as she kind of loathed the images that she was seeing of Bernie, this book came out called A Look Back. It's this legendary hardcover slipcase book. And it was super expensive because it was like independently produced. It wasn't like a HarperCollins book or anything like that. It was super expensive. And she pitched in with a very good friend of mine. They put their money together and they bought it for me for my birthday one year.
Oh my God.
Now that's love.
That's really love.
Oh my God. I know exactly which book you're talking about. That is amazing.
Yeah. And so that's why I married her.
That's a keeper right there.
She's a keeper.
That's great.
Oh wow, that's so
awesome.
cool.
All right, Bill, one more for you. All right, and I'm gonna say this name because I know based on an interview I've read, based on one of your interviews I've read, that I know you've had an interaction with this comic legend I'm about to name, but the last one I'm gonna mention is Will Eisner.
Well, I think I discovered his artwork a little later than I should have, and later than most. But when I discovered the spirit, by then I was already a comic artist. And I know I'd seen his art, but I didn't really put the art with the name. But when I really discovered the spirit and started looking at the storytelling, that really influenced the way I would lay out a comic book story. As editor at Bongo, I commissioned Ian Boothby to write a story that was, we had a title called Simpson Super Spectacular, where the way that came about was we had to cancel Radioactive Man because the sales weren't good enough. even though it had just won an Eisner Award for Best Humor Publication. So I was not happy about that, and I was desperate to find a way to keep Radioactive Man in print. So I came up with this idea of, what if we did like a book that when you flipped it over, on one side it was Radioactive Man, on the other side it was, Homer as Pie Man or Bart as Bart Man. It was one of the Simpsons characters, because I knew that would sell better if something had Homer and Bart on the cover. So I wanted to do something that paid tribute to Will Eisner. So Ian Boothby wrote this story called The Sprint, where Homer finds out that Moe's bar is closing early. So it's like after dinner, he wants to go hang out at Moe's. And Marge informs him that the bar's closing early tonight because there's all this construction going on down in Main Street. So Homer has to like take to the rooftops to get to Moe's in time before it closes.
I knew it.
And before, like, as he's running out of the house, it's chilly out, and he grabs Grandpa's overcoat and hat, Grandpa's fedora. And Lisa, for some reason, had like one of those headache masks, one of the.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, you can put it in the refrigerator. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's sitting there, and he grabs that and he puts that on. So he looks like the Spirit. And he goes running out and like across the rooftops, and he runs into all these obstacles that are homages to the Spirit. It's one of my favorite Bongo stories that we did. I ended up drawing it. That's one of those perks of being the editor, because you can assign yourself the stories that you want to draw. And Andrew Peapoy inked it. Came out really well. But probably the best Eisner story is it was like maybe the first, or it was probably the first year that Bongo had a booth at Comic-Con. Like, we had come out in 93, but we didn't have a booth. We were just there kind of doing PR for the comics that were going to be coming out from Bongo, the first issues that would be coming out later that year. So this must have been like 94, I think. And I was standing there in the Bongo booth, and Will Eisner walked by, and he's just like checking out the convention. So, he saw, our banner or our, whatever displays we had. And so he kind of stopped for a second, long enough for me to say, hi, Mr. Eisner. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan. So he started asking me about Bongo. And this was the year, like, we had just gotten into the comic business, and we were hearing all this buzz about the industry taking a downturn. Like, because there was a speculator market, and it was kind of like the bubble was starting to burst. And I was just kind of worried about the wisdom of launching a comic book company in this time period where things looked like they were starting to go south for comics. And I just remember he kind of shook his head, and he said, so I was like expressing my concern. I was trying to be a big shot and act like, I knew what I was talking about in terms of what's happening in the comic industry with Will Eisner. And he just kind of shook his head, and he said, I've been in this business since the 30s. And in that time, I've seen this happen probably at least 5 times, where, there's a boom and then there's a bust. And he said, comics have always come back. Comics will always come back. They may reinvent themselves. They may come back in a different form that you don't expect, but, or they might come back in different genres that are, now popular, whereas they weren't popular 20 years ago. But he said, don't worry, it's out, comics will survive this. They've survived much worse. And I just remember that feeling of hope talking to him. It was invigorating. It was, relieving, kind of sighed a big breath of relief, just because you think if Will Eisner tells you this, then there's nothing to worry about.
Oh, I'd feel like
there wasn't a burning bush in the background, was there? Or any sort of like booming voice of any kind?
I think there actually was, because the Marvel booth was like right across from us.
Hey, true believer.
I'd probably weep. I'd probably be weeping.
That's so cool. Wow. It was exactly what you needed to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I just remember, like, when they asked me to host the Eisner Awards.
Oh, wow. You
wow.
got to host the Eisner Awards too.
Yeah, I did that for a number of years, and luckily, part of it was when he was still around, so it was
That's
cool
awesome.
to be the host of the Eisner Awards while he was there.
Bill, what haven't you done in
Yeah,
comic book
seriously.
space?
I mean, what's going on here?
And I guess I definitely didn't want to gloss over that you've won, that you mentioned Radioactive Man won an Eisner. So you're an Eisner winning comic book creator, and you even got to host the Eisners. Is there anything, I guess, my question is there anything in the comic book realm that you're still aspiring
Yes.
to? Oh, yes.
Okay.
That was quick. What is it?
I'd love to write and or draw a Batman story.
Wow.
Oh,
Right there. Yeah, of course that makes sense.
Yeah, that's something. And I kind of had this dream that while I was at MAD, because I was, MAD's part of DC, and I was, at the DC offices, maybe they might see my display of Batman memorabilia in my office and say, somebody might come by one day and say, "Hey, Bill, we need a story. We need a cover."
Well, Bill, I think we both know someone that could make that happen, and his last name is Lee, first name Jim.
yeah. Okay.
I think if you promise to return that napkin back, I think he could probably make that happen.
Yeah, you're right. That's why it hasn't happened.
That's it.
Yeah. But actually,
Yeah.
on the topic of Batman, there's one more creator that I want to bring up, and he's not necessarily a comic artist, but he is a legend in his own right, and especially on the topic of Batman. And this individual is Paul Deeney, screenwriter, acclaimed screenwriter, producer, and writer for some of our favorite, if not all of the Batman animated series.
True story.
I know that you have a relationship with Paul Deeney, both professionally and I think even personally.
Right.
On a Radioactive Man episode, I had highlighted how Paul Deeney had he wrote such a great prologue in the Radioactive Man Repository Volume 1 trade.
Oh yeah.
That I thought was so witty. For anyone that hasn't read that, it's Paul Deeney pretending that he's been a fan of Radioactive Man throughout the years.
It's so heartwarming to read.
So I wanted to hear your about your relationship with Paul Deeney.
Well, Paul and I met the year that we won our first Eisner Award for no, wait. Yeah, it must have been. I think it was 94 when we won for Simpsons Comics #1. We won Best Short Story for Amazing Colossal Homer. I think it was that year. Anyway, we were at tables at the awards, and I remember Paul was sitting kind of like back to back with me. He was at one table, I was at another. And I just remember introducing myself, and I said, I do the Simpsons comics. I'm a big fan of Batman, the animated series. And he's like, "Oh, I'm a huge Simpsons fan." So that was kind of how we first met. We stayed friends. We stayed in contact. I asked him to write a Treehouse of Horror story. That's right. And I think that cemented the friendship a little bit more. But then, he started inviting my wife and I to like Christmas parties. He had this amazing Christmas party every year. So we sort of got to be friends over the years, socially, and got to work on a few comic projects. He wrote another regular Simpson story that was, I can't remember what issue it was, but it was kind of fairly early issue of Simpsons comics. And I actually have a really good Paul Deeney story, if you have a minute.
We've got all the time you need.
We got minutes.
So when Paul decided to get married, at this point we were good enough friends that his fiance called me up one day, and she said, "I have a big favor to ask of you." Her name's Misty Lee, by the way. She's his wife. now, but at the time she was his fiance, and she said, Paul really wants to have a bachelor party. And his brother is his best man, but his brother lives up in Northern California, and he's not going to be able to come down like the weekend before the wedding. So I was wondering if you would throw a bachelor party for Paul. And I said, absolutely. I've never thrown a bachelor party, but I'd love to do it. I said, I'm a little worried because in this day and age, bachelor parties are kind of different than they were back when I was younger.
Right.
I've seen and heard about, I haven't been to any recent bachelor parties, but I've seen where things can get pretty outrageous. Sometimes with like prostitutes and,
Right.
crazy stuff. And so I'm like, obviously you don't want me to do something like that. She's like, no, like something cool, something vintage. And I said, okay, let me work on this. So I knew that Paul really liked tiki bars. He loved Trader Vic's in Beverly Hills, the classic Los Angeles tiki bar. And there was this thing in Los Angeles called Lucha Vavoom, which is masked Mexican wrestlers who perform, a Mexican wrestling show. But also like they have they're kind of like ring girls, but they also do like kind of a intermission show. And they do like a burlesque dance thing. They don't get naked.
Sure. It's light burlesque show.
It's like, right out of the 50s.
Right.
So I'd heard about that, and I thought, I wonder if I could hire them to be like the entertainment, because that would be perfect for this venue. So I rent out a private room at Trader Vic's, and I get these girls. There's like 3 of them that are going to come, and I arranged to meet with the leader of this group prior to anybody arriving. So she says, yeah, I want to talk to you about what you expect us to do and, how it's going to go. So I meet with her, and we're in this kind of area outside the room that I rented. And it's kind of like a hallway. And on the end of the hall, there's like the restrooms. So we go over everything we have to go over. And she says, okay, so when my girls arrive, we're going to go use the ladies' room. We'll get into our costumes. I'll meet you back out here at such and such a time. And then you can bring us in. You can like introduce us. Okay, great. So everybody starts arriving. Misty had given me Paul's Rolodex. So I, invite all of his friends. And so everybody's in there having a good time. I look at my watch. Oh, it's time for the burlesque dancers to come in. So I go out to the hallway, and there's nobody there. And at the end of the hall, there's the ladies' room, and I could tell I could hear like commotion, like there's people laughing. It sounds like a party going on in there. So I go and, I'm kind of hanging out outside the ladies' room, and that feels really creepy. So I kind of pull back, but I'm just, kind of getting nervous and getting impatient. And finally, a woman comes out of the ladies' room, and I said, "Excuse me, are there like some women in sort of like burlesque costumes in there?" And she goes, "Oh my God, yeah, it's amazing. Like we've just been in there partying with them." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, could you like grab one of them and tell them I need to, speak with her?" So she goes in, girl comes out, or woman comes out, and she says, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I know we're late. We kind of got lost track of time." She said, "Carrie Fisher came in to the ladies' room."
Oh, wow.
And with some of her friends, they're having a party in another private room for Julian Lennon. It's Julian Lennon's birthday.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, "Oh my God, really?" And she's like, "Yeah, I guess Richard Dreyfuss is over there." And, she's like dropping all these celebrity names. And I'm like, "Wow, that's amazing." However, we should get this thing going. She goes, okay, I'll get the girls. So she brings the girls out. They come out of the ladies' room, followed by Carrie Fisher, Beverly D'Angelo,
Oh, wow.
and I think Tracy Ullman
Oh,
is
cool.
there.
That is
I
right.
think it was like another famous actress. And I'm just standing there going, how could this get any more weird? And so I'm about to take them up to the door, and I'm explaining, okay, I'll go in, I'll make an announcement, then you ladies come in, and we've got your music set up, et cetera, et cetera. So Carrie comes over to me, and
First name basis. Okay.
yeah, she can tell that I'm, the person kind of in charge of this whole thing. And she comes over and she says, excuse me, so there's a bachelor party going on in there, right? And I said, yeah. And she goes, would you mind if we came in just for a minute? Because we kind of we've been talking to the ladies and we're very fascinated with what they do. And we kind of would like to watch.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, absolutely, you're more than welcome to come in. However, I need to say two things. One is there's a lot of guys in there with cameras, so you're probably going to get your picture taken. And number two, Mark Hamill is one of the guests.
Get out of here. What?
Yes, because Mark did the voice of the Joker.
Damn, I
so,
didn't. Yeah,
that's funny.
Oh, that's great. I didn't put two and together.
So he's friends. So he's friends with Paul.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And she goes, Mark's here? And I said, yep, he's one of the guests. And I explained the Joker thing. And she goes, oh my God, that's great. So I go in, I announce the entertainment. They come dancing in, and Carrie and the other women are like imitating the dancers. So they're like dancing in with them, doing all the moves and everything. Everybody's snapping pictures. Carrie spots Mark, and she kind of like dances over to him and puts her arms around him, gives him a kiss, and he's blown away because, how weird is this?
What a fun time.
It was amazing. It was a great night. And I just remember Paul saying to me, thank you so much. This is the best bachelor party.
Cool.
I don't know how you managed to get Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker to come to my bachelor party, but thank you.
That's so touching. That's awesome. That is a great story.
That is a fantastic story. That is wow. Just wow.
God, it's so fast. What's crazy is one of the first times I saw Beverly D'Angelo wasn't in Vacation. It was actually in an episode of Tales from the Crypt when I was younger.
Oh.
And she played a werewolf, and I was like, that lady's cool. I was like, hey, wait a minute. And then like everybody's like, yeah, she's in Vacation, dude. What are you talking about, man? I was kind of like, oh, like I thought like I discovered her amongst my friends.
I imagine you
she was very sweet. I wish we had been able to get Julian and Richard Dreyfuss in there, but
do you have any pictures from that night? Like
I don't, because being the host, I was
running around. Yeah, running around. Okay.
And I don't remember. I think at that time I didn't have like a smartphone yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think my wife had one, but I was still using like the old flip phone. So I didn't. If I had a camera, it wasn't something that was easily accessible that I could just pull out of my back pocket and take pictures. It was something that I would have had, sitting in a bag. So no, I didn't. I mean, there must be pictures somewhere. I'm sure Paul has pictures.
Well, here's what I'll do. If I ever get the chance to meet Paul Deeney, and I've only got to ask him one question, I'm gonna say, Paul, who is your best friend in life?
Yeah.
And if he doesn't say Bill Morrison, I'll let you know, Bill. We can get that resolved.
We'll let you know.
Hopefully he will say Misty Lee, his lovely wife.
Of course. Second best friend better be Bill Morrison. I got you. Well, damn, I don't know if any of my other questions are going to provoke an amazing story like that, but I'll give it a shot. But Bill, on the topic, Cesar asked a good question about, your preference over digital and traditional media when it comes to creating art. And was something that we talked about at the top of the show was your involvement in creating or designing a digital comic book app and reader. And I know that you're someone just like me. You value having a print collection and having shelves of books take up all of the space in your house.
Me too.
Probably much to your wife and your spouse's
chagrin.
Yeah, exactly. I was curious, about these apps, which are the Futurama Land and Simpsons Store apps, which you could download now, off the App Store. Can you talk a little bit about working in this digital space with comics, and what were some of your and what's your attitudes towards digital comic books being a print and a physical collector?
I actually, when I was given that assignment, it was hard to get excited about it because I do love physical comics. I didn't really see a reason to have digital comics. But part of my job was to create ads for our, like house ads for our comics promoting the digital apps. So how do I get people excited about something that I'm not excited about? And because of the fact that I had to get like familiar with what we were creating, I had to, like, I got the Comixology app and I started downloading comics to just see how the guided view works and all that. Zoom in, zoom out, to look at all the tutorials for, how to navigate the app. And, because we were doing something similar. So I had to see like, what does this app need? And I realized that I started taking I had these on an iPad, and I started taking it with me on trips. And I would read comics on a plane, and I would read comics in my hotel room. And
that's how digital comics get you.
They get you.
When you start experiencing the convenience of them and not having to lug around, a backpack of, heavy books,
right, you
become a fan.
And so I started thinking it's not necessarily one or the other, because all the arguments and the discourse about it was always, I prefer digital to physical. Digital's going to replace physical, that kind of rhetoric. And I started thinking, no, it's not one or the other, it's both. And they can coexist, and there are actually good reasons to buy digital comics. I mean, if you want to just buy exclusively digital, that's up to you. That's fine. But it makes total sense for a collector who maybe actually has physical copies of certain comics, but wants to be able to reread them wherever they are. And so I did this ad that had Bart and Lisa and Comic Book Guy in like the security line at an airport. So they're going on a trip. Bart's got a smartphone. Lisa's got an iPad. They're both laughing at, comics that they're reading on their devices. Comic Book Guy's got this stack of long boxes and he's sweating and he's like struggling. I mean, it's absurd that he's taking these on his trip with him, but the headline was, now you can take your entire Simpsons comics collection wherever you go. So putting out the idea that you can take as many comics as you want. You can read them on a bus, on a subway. And you could read them a little more privately. Like if you're the type of person that doesn't really want, like you're a 40-year-old adult male that doesn't want certain people thinking that you read comics.
You're describing.
You don't want to necessarily be sitting on a subway with a Spider-Man comic.
I am not ashamed to read my comics.
That is the difference.
However, I am a 40-year-old male who will read comics in front of people digitally.
And he'll take comics from little kids' hands, for the record, too. No shame in his game.
So anyway, it dawned on me, and I just came around to the fact that there are lots of good reasons to love digital. And so, we started embracing those in the, in the advertising that we did to try to promote the apps.
Well said. That is awesome to hear. And and I say this with full respect, you as someone that has been entrenched in comic books for a long time, in the prime years where digital was not an option, I thought it was really refreshing to see, to hear your perspective on digital comics, because you do see that discourse happening a lot. Well, maybe not so much now because it's, digital comics has been welcomed.
It's a little less polarizing.
Exactly. So I thought that was such an interesting aspect to your career, that you had a hand in building and advertising these really good looking apps for and essentially, for anyone that's not aware, they're essentially the Marvel Unlimited app for Simpsons comics, and there's one for Futurama. So it sounds like you could read all of those comics from Bongo and well really just Bongo on the go. So I thought that was a great addition to your very illustrious career. Once again, it comes down to what haven't you done.
I know
you've brought in the digital age for Simpson comic fans, which is awesome. Which, Bill, I kind of want to go ahead and pivot to your current work and what you got going on now. I said at the top that I said at the top your new book, which is The Beatles Nerd Search. All You Need Is Love, a Yellow Submarine puzzle book. It came out in It came out in November of 2021. It was published by Hero Collector. There might be listeners that don't know that you worked on a graphic novel adaptation of Beatles' Yellow Submarine for Titans Comics back in 2018. It was part of, I think, the 50th anniversary of the Yellow Submarine, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 50th anniversary.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a self-proclaimed Beatles fan, I've read, other interviews where you've proclaimed your love of the Beatles. What kind of honor was it to work on this puzzle book? And especially, it being your second Beatles project, which, some comic artists wish they could even work on just one piece of Beatles work.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you get to do a second thing of anything, it feels great because it sort of validates what you did the first time. It basically says, well, somebody liked what I did well enough that they're hiring me to do this other similar thing.
Especially from an estate like the Beatles, where they're vetting, everything down to, the details and the contracts, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. When I did the graphic novel, I really sort of felt I felt a lot of responsibility, because being a Beatles fan myself, I knew I didn't want to do anything that was going to be less than,
Sure.
I wanted whatever I did, I wanted Beatles fans to embrace it and think it was really cool. And the first thing, when I took the assignment, the first thing that kind of dawned on me was knowing the film, which has like groundbreaking animation, incredible music, beautiful psychedelic, animation and design. Why would anyone want to experience a silent, non-moving version of that? So, like, what's the point? What is, other than a cash grab to take advantage of an anniversary and to try to get money out of the hands of Beatles fans?
Right.
What is it that will make this special? And I started thinking about the psychedelic posters that I had on my wall when I was a kid, and how much I love those, and how that's something only print and graphics can do. So I started thinking, well, what if I tried to make every page look as much like a psychedelic poster as possible, but still tell a story? And that was when I started getting excited about it. And not every page looks like a poster, but I did things with, influenced by Steranko and Neil Adams, and, artists from my youth who were taking the standard rectangular stack of boxes and doing weird, different things with them, changing the shapes of panels, and just revolutionizing how people read comics. I thought, employing that attitude to this, iconic animated film might be the way to go in print. So I did that as much as I could, and it was really well received. I mean, Beatles fans seem to love it. They say a lot of them tell me their kids love it. They love reading it to their kids. So it was just very satisfying, very gratifying to have figured out a way to tell the story of the film that wasn't just kind of cheap and ordinary. So then a couple years later, I'm contacted by Hero Collector to do this puzzle book. So like I said, that was kind of validation that, I guess, the graphic novel was good enough that they think I would be good to draw this new puzzle book. What I didn't realize at first is that they also wanted me to write it. I thought I was just being hired to do the art. And they showed me some examples of other books that they had done in this series. And for anybody that doesn't know the Nerd Search series, they basically take a property that has a lot of fans, that people love and know pretty well. And they show you scenes from that thing, whatever it is, that have mistakes and flaws and goofs and gaffes and
Throw you off.
intentional incongruities and things like that, so that you, as the hopefully mega fan, will be able to go through and find all the things that are wrong. So the first two they did were they did a Ghostbusters and they did a Star Trek, the original Star Trek TV series. So they would show like a scene, from Trouble with Tribbles, and there would be color mistakes, people in the scene that weren't in the scene in the show, somebody doing something that they actually did in a different scene, not in this one. So things like that fans have to identify. And then at the end, the second half of the book is dedicated to showing you the spreads and identifying where all the things were that you were supposed to find. And then you score yourself. So you can find out exactly how big a fan you are based on how many things you got right or wrong.
That's cool. That's
Hey,
cool
wait a
little
minute.
social aspect.
Those Klingons shouldn't have ridges. That's awesome. So
yeah, so I had to come up with all those mistakes and put them into the scenes I was drawing, and then also write the text, and it had to be clever and sound like the Beatles, and but it was a lot of fun. Ultimately, it was great. I really enjoyed doing it, and I'm pretty proud of the book, how it turned out.
the Beatles are that kind of music group that the more you start finding out and the more you start getting into them, there's like more and more little things you can kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Like one of my buddies told me that I think the song "Oh Darling," I think off Abbey Road, Paul would only, during the recording process, he would only sing it in the morning because he could get his voice to that low sort of growly scream that he needed to kind of channel back that Little Richard kind of, ooh, like how he does in the song.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do you know this? And he's like, dude, I'm a Beatles fan, man. Like, I was like, but that's cool. That's cool information, So,
and that was part of what made it a little scary, because I wanted to make it challenging for Beatles fans, because they do know a lot of minutia,
big time.
but I didn't want to make it off-putting for more casual fans.
Sure.
So I had to kind of strike a balance. I remember some things I had in there got edited out because the publishers sort of pulled people in the office, and on a couple other things I had, people were like, nobody's ever going to get that. It's way too hard.
This is subterranean, Bill. Okay. You need to get a little higher here.
Had to pull it back a little bit.
So as far as people getting into stuff and minutia, are you still attending cons and doing sketches for people and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm doing more cons now because I'm freelancing now, and I moved from Los Angeles to Detroit.
Right.
Um, so my time is more my own, and also there's a financial component when you're a freelancer that doing cons can be lucrative. Um, it's kind of a good way of bringing in income in these sort of days between jobs.
Right.
So yeah, I am doing a lot of that. I've got a pretty full schedule for 2022,
Okay.
as long as things stay open. But yeah, I do sketches for fans. I sell. I have a lot of Bongo Comics because um, I don't. I know this isn't common for most publishers, but for some reason, when we started Bongo, because I was in the first year, I was art director. And then after Steve and Cindy left, I became editor and art director. So I was, I came up with the title creative director to cover both of those. But part of my deal was I got 50 copies of every issue.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Where do you store all that?
Bill, I hear what you're saying,
You're
and I
like-
understand that this is an incredible burden for you. And I'd like to let you know that Potter and I are here to you. That's CESARBAD.
Yeah, I'll send you our address. And honestly, look, if you and the Simpsons is greater than podcast, you had mentioned a Simpsons ash can comic that is hard to come by. I'm just
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
Man, you're too much.
if you got a copy of that, Jacksonville, Florida would love to
Look,
receive.
we're trying to help you out, Bill,
yeah,
okay?
exactly. You don't need all those. Bill. You're going digital. You're
on.
going digital.
This is the digital king.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get 50 of that
That's
because
funny.
it is worth quite a bit now.
That's
And
crazy.
over the years, I've given a lot of those away, and
Sure.
so I still do. If I turned this, I'm actually kind of sorting my collection. So if I turned my camera just slightly this way, you'd see a lot
Yeah,
of boxes.
I can see some long boxes back there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
these
go
are
ahead.
all.
Yeah, look at that.
And for our
Okay.
listeners, I forgot to mention at the top, we are recording this via video, so our patrons will get first dibs on the video
Yeah.
version of this.
That's cool.
Wait, did you
Yeah,
have
so
filing
there's-
cabinets? Are those filing cabinets filled with comics too?
I've got flat files full of art and posters and prints and things. I keep
Good
the comics in the short boxes.
Nice.
Yeah,
A
Bill,
little
I'm
plug
on.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, send it. Bill, I'm on your Instagram right now, and for our listeners right now, that's you can follow Bill at Atomic Battery. I'll have links to his socials and
Yep.
everything in the show notes. But what I really dig, and it looks like you have definitely stayed busy attending cons. It looks like you went to Planet Comic Con in Kansas, and you did one, I guess, a comic expo in Canada.
Mhm.
But I love these posts where you're sharing these Funko Pops. And you're doing like remarks
yeah.
and sketches
Oh yeah,
So cool
on the
looking.
on the Funko box themselves, and it looks painted too.
they're painted.
Wow, that's cool.
I have a collection of paint pens, and so I'll kind of sketch out the character just in marker on the window of the
Mhm.
pop, and then I color it with the paint pens, and then I go over the line, because it gets a little messy. And I go over and I clean up the line with a Sharpie on the back end, and yeah, some of them they almost look like little animation cells because you can lay the paint down fairly flat sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to say that's
And,
exactly what they look like.
And I see
Yeah.
some Golden Age Batman sketches here too. So you've been pretty busy at these cons.
Yeah, for some reason, as I mentioned earlier, I've never gotten to draw a Batman story, but I've done some of these sketches that have made their way onto the internet, and I think people know that I have that in my toolbox. So
We're starting the campaign. Gonna keep it rolling.
I do get asked to do Golden Age Batman quite a bit.
Good stuff. So, Bill, outside of the Beatles book, outside of possibly getting a sketch from you at a convention, what's something else that people are listening should be on the lookout for in regards to
Right.
latest projects? Or whatever you
Yeah,
got going on?
I just did some package drawings for Super 7 for Simpsons, the reaction figures.
Is it the newest drop they just had, like with the Duff Man and Krusty? Are you involved with any of that?
No, I did Troy McClure,
Awesome.
Troy
and
McClure.
and the one I'm working on now is a Treehouse of Horror series.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I've got like 4, um, I guess they call them J hook card illustrations for some Treehouse of Horror characters. I just did, kind of recently did a poster for, there was a 2-part Simpsons episode called The Serious Flanders.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I saw that. It's kind of like a Fargo sort of.
Right.
There.
So
Nice.
like a 2-part Fargo riff, and I did a poster for that. I don't know if they actually printed the poster, but it was done, kind of like a movie poster, and it appeared online. So I'm still doing Simpson stuff, obviously. I'm doing some stuff for Illumination,
Oh wow.
for the new Minions movie. Most of that's concept though. It's probably not anything that's gonna, appear as a poster, but it, because I'll do like a concept design, and then if it gets picked up, they create, in 3D, they create the characters that are in my concept sketch.
Oh cool.
So I wouldn't be doing like the actual finished poster, but it would be my design.
Good
Wow.
stuff.
Keeping it yellow.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Bill, as we get to kind of wrapping up this amazing interview,
This was good.
I want to ask you a question that I have asked every comic book artist that I've had the privilege of interviewing on the show. It's definitely
He said he gave them all away, man. He really, it was like 5 minutes ago.
I thought I'd give it another shot, but I think it's safe to say that a lot of our listeners, either are huge fans of comic books and the comic book culture themselves.
Yep.
And I definitely think it's safe to say that a majority of them, or a strong handful of them, are aspiring comic book creators, whether it be artists, writers, maybe even editors out there themselves.
Sure.
I want to hear in your words, what's a piece of advice that you'd give to an aspiring or rising creator looking to break into comics, and maybe something specifically that you wish someone would have told you as you were trying to get your foot in the door?
Run.
Yeah, you can say that too.
Yeah, I would say have a backup plan in terms of, and I'm not saying like, train to be a truck driver or something like that. I think you can still remain in art and illustration, or writing fiction or whatever it is your specialty that you're going to apply to comic books. But unless you're getting royalties and you're doing work on a very popular best-selling book, it doesn't pay all that much. So most people who are doing comics are sort of doing it as a labor of love, because they just, can't
crazy and love, crazy and love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's like something I really needed to do because I fell in love with comics and I needed to be a part of that. For me, in the early years, in the Bongo days, I was very fortunate in that I made most of my money employed by Bongo as an editor / art director. And then I could, when I had time, I could do covers. I could, write stories, draw stories. I could remain creative, kind of evenings and weekends, but most of my time was spent editing and art directing, and that's how I made my money, and I was able to make a good living. If I hadn't had that and I was a freelancer just trying to make a living as a writer or an artist, I would have had a very tough time. I probably would have given it up because I'm not that fast. Some people are fast enough that they can do enough work that they bring in, as much as they need for make their monthly nut, and they're covered.
Yeah.
A lot of people can't. So I would just say have something else in your toolbox. If you want to be a comic book artist, also learn to be an illustrator. Also learn find something else fun and creative that you can do that pays better, whether it's advertising or doing game art, designing video games, whatever it is, that allows you. Look at people like Bruce Timm. He's a great example. He makes a ton of money as an animation producer and character designer and everything else he's done in animation. And then every so often, if he feels like it, he can draw a comic book, and he's revered as one of the great comic book artists, even though he hasn't drawn that many comics.
Right.
So he keeps his foot in that pond because of the fact that he makes most of his money doing something else. So I think that would be probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give. Unless you're super fast, and if you're super fast, then you might be able to make it work. But otherwise, be prepared to find something else that pays better.
That's some really good grounded advice.
Yep.
Bill, thank you. Bill, it's we're getting to that 2+ hour mark. I know, and I've got you here on a Sunday evening, so I just want to thank you for your time for this great interview. I know we've probably got some diehard fans of yours that are probably screaming right now into their phones or whatever they're listening to ask him about his Disney work, ask him about the Futurama stuff, ask him about his work at the National Cartoon Society and Mad TV, which just means that we'll have to have you on for a part 2.
That's just the way
here
it is
in the future. We wanted to make sure that we used all this time to get all of our nerdy comic book questions out, because when you look at your career and everything you've accomplished, you've contributed so much great things to the world of comic books in your own unique way. And, what Bongo Comics has contributed and provided to the comic book communities, something to be revered. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing those stories.
We hope sorry.
Thank you. It's very nice to hear that. I think when we were doing comics at Bongo for a lot of years, we sort of felt, we knew in our hearts we were doing something that was that Simpsons fans would love if they discovered it. Back then, there weren't a lot of kids read Bongos, but not a lot of adults. And I think now it's gratifying that a lot of those kids have grown up. They're sort of discovering or rediscovering Bongo Comics and realizing that we put a lot of effort into trying to match the level of quality that the show had. And it's just gratifying to hear that, because we never took knocks from people, but we did always kind of feel like we were the redheaded stepchildren of the TV show. So it's really nice to see Bongo getting some love.
Absolutely.
Well, we're grateful to have you on, and we hope we've made you feel like you walked into a comic book store and you were talking with some.
Very much.
Cool.
That's exactly what it felt like. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Bill,
except I usually don't wear a headset when I go into a comic shop.
Well, that's your loss, because these are horrible. Actually, why are we wearing these right now?
Ears are getting kind of itchy.
Exactly. That's when it's time to get to wrapping it up. Is when the headphones are just unbearable.
They're getting hot, and you're like,
they fuse with your skin. Yeah. But Bill, like I said, we'd love to have you back on to talk some more about your career and some of the stuff we didn't hit. But like I said, I'll have links to your Twitter, your Instagram, and some links to some other stuff that you've mentioned, so our listeners can tune in that way.
Yep.
But with that being said, there you have it, Shortbox Nation. We're at the end of our show this week. Let's give it up one more time for our guest, Bill Morrison. And do yourselves a favor and follow the man on social media for updates on what he's got going on, as well as posts sharing some awesome artwork. I mean, you'll see these posts and then you'll immediately want to find what conventions that Bill's at to get a sketch.
Yep.
I have links to his Twitter and Instagram in the show notes. Make sure you check that out. And of course, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Tell us what you thought about this episode. Reach out to us on social media or email us. Send in a short email to our inbox at theshortboxjacks@gmail.com.
Testify. You come to Bill moment. That's
exactly.
what we want.
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear if Bill or Bongo Comics has had a positive impact on your life.
Or if you never heard of it until this episode and you dived in and you were like, my God, I've seen the light.
Exactly.
Write us. We want to hear. We want to know what's going on.
And tune in again next week. All right. Speaking about emails and whatnot, we'll be celebrating our 350th episode next Wednesday with the full Short Box crew. That means Ashley and Ed will be back as well, back in attendance for a special Q&A episode. So if you have a burning question about the podcast, our comic collections, or you want to know what we think about a particular comic or property, write into the show and send us your questions by Saturday, February 12th. We'll answer the best ones on the show and be giving away and mailing out some exclusive comics to people who send in great questions.
And be nice, you gargoyles. Be nice.
Nicer than what you guys normally are, right?
Normal,
just a tad, all right? It's our 350th. Celebrate with us. Write us at theshortboxjacks@gmail.com or slide into our DMs on Instagram or Twitter, as Cesar would like to say.
Put words in my mouth.
You said at the beginning. I got proof. In the meantime, Shortbox Nation, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. And please continue to make mine and yours Shortbox. We'll catch you next week. Peace. Awesome. Bill, this was a lot of fun.
Appreciate you, man. That was awesome.
My pleasure. That was fun for me too. Thanks, guys.
Right on.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, I'll probably be giving Warren a call and absolutely talking shit about how this is a way better interview. No, for sure. But, Warren's been great to pick.
He's good people
for sure. So, and your interviews with him were a lot of fun.
Yeah, tell him I said hi. I've got a box packed and ready to send to him. So.
Oh, nice.
Well, I don't think you got his. I don't know if you got his updated address, but I'll go ahead and send that to you.
Oh, is it similar to yours?
How duplicitous.
I got you. All right, Bill.
All right, thanks, guys.
Great evening. All right,
take care, Bill.
Have a good evening. You too. Bye-bye.